All right. I'd like to thank everybody for coming and listening. Today's topic is entitled A Threshold Off in a Distance. A Threshold Off in a Distance. I'd like to start out by sharing a story with you. It's a story about a young man who grew up in a village. This village was very primitive, and it was in the mountains, and it was down in a valley. And this young man grew up as a boy, and he can remember as a boy waking up in the morning, and no matter which direction he looked, he saw the tops of mountain peaks. And having having always wondering, what is it? What is over the top of that? The only thing in the outside world he ever saw from time to time was a commercial jet or something flying over. And he would look up in the sky and he'd think, wow, where are they going? Just what is out there? This got to be just a huge world. There must be so much more. Well, this boy, he grew up. He became a young man. And he said to himself, I will go. I will go find out what it is on the other side of those mountain peaks. And I will fly one of those commercial jetliners one day. I will do what I have to do to get there. Now, his parents weren't very well off. They weren't poor, but he just wanted more in life. So what he did when he was old enough is he said, I'll go. And he got together with a bunch of his friends and they said, listen, you really want to do this? I mean, you don't even know what's out there. He says, no, I don't know what's out there. But you know what? I want to find out. What is out there off in this distance that I've never seen before? Now, he knew there was a big world out there, but he never experienced it. So he set off. He had a little stick with his bag, a little bag hooked to the stick, and he was what we would call a real primitive kind of a hillbilly boy. And off he went. And in 1 hour, he led after another hour, and one day fell upon one day, and it was about a week later, and he found himself, and he said, wow, I have traveled a long way. And he started having second thoughts, and he says, do I go back? I mean, how far will I travel? Oh, he knew how to take care of himself. He his parents and the community, they taught them how to fish and survive on your own. So he was fine in that way. But, being alone that long and he didn't know what his future held. And he stood there and what do I do? And he says, nope, I'm going to press on. I want this. So he moved on and another hour fell in front of another hour and another day went in front of another day and another week went by. And he was really getting to the point where what have I done here? I really want this. And one night he was walking and he was just about ready to make camp, coming to the top of one of the major ridges, points of a mountain. And he reminded him when he was a child how he longed to just look over the top. And he was coming over one that was quite substantial. The sun was coming down, and he noticed a light coming from the other side of that. And he walked up, and as he walked, it got brighter and brighter, and he was going to make camp that night, but his curiosity as the sun set, that light and this horizon, as he came over that mountain peak, he looked and he saw a light, boom, just over the top of that horizon. And he walked up more and more, and he was just getting to the top of that ridge, and another light and another light. And to his amazement, as he walked up farther and farther, he stood on the top of that ridge and he looked down, and it was the dusk of an evening with the sun going down, and he saw the most beautiful city. It was massive to him. And the lights, he never saw so many lights. It was beautiful. He saw the hustle and the bustle of the people, the evening rush. He saw the cars and the trains and the buses, and he could see them. Now, this was quite a distance away, several hours walk. But he said, look at this world. He was just amazed. He never witnessed this with his eyes. And he said, oh, thank you, God. I will go tomorrow. It's a several-hour walk, and it was getting late. I will camp here, he said, and I'll go tomorrow, and I'll explore, and I'll find a life. I'll find a life for myself. And he did that. He was so eager. He set his tent up, and he could hardly sleep that night. And he closed his eyes and opened them, and he didn't get a good night's sleep. He was so excited. So he got up the next morning at the crack of dawn, and he's just packing his bags up, and he was just so eager. I want to see this with my own eyes and experience it. And He journeyed down there that day. It took several hours. And towards the mid to late day, he started to get into the city. And he was amazed at the different cultures, the different lifestyle. He never thought and imagined it was like what he was seeing. And he walked down the road, and he got to a supermarket, and the supermarket said help wanted. And he said, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to inquire about possibly getting a job. So he walks in there, and the manager looks at him like, wow, where'd this kid come from? He looked like he come from the sticks, you know. And he said, hey, I would like to have a job. He said, I would like to have a job. And he says, well, the owner of the supermarket looks him up and down a little bit, and he's like, boy, I could really use the help. What do you have for experience? And he didn't really have any experience, but he could see he was a decent-minded kid, well-mannered young man. So he said, I'm going to pull the trigger. I'm going to take my chance. We'll try you out for a week. Well, he was so happy. He showed up for work the first day, and he worked and worked and worked, and the week went by, and the manager and the owner of the supermarket was extremely happy that he took the chances with this kid or a young man, because he has excellent work ethics. He knew how to do his math. He was polite, well-mannered, and he was very pleased. And he says, listen, here's your first week's pay. He says, and in fact, there's a little bit more on there because I'm very happy with you. So this young man was so pumped. He took his whole check, and he took half of his check, and he bought food in the supermarket that he worked at. And he walked across the street to the post office, and he mailed big box of food to his parents. And he said, I found work. I am going to explore more, and I'm going to take care of you, mom and dad. And he sent them food, and his dad and mom got that, and they were so that, look at my son. He's gonna, he's old enough. His mom and dad were getting older, and he was taking care of his family with most of his pay, taking care of a little bit by himself. But he gained a reputation in this town that people liked. So it was easy for him to move up in the world of work. And he always wanted to fly those planes. So he had this goal in the back of his mind. And the months and the weeks and the years went by, and he ended up always sending food home every week to his parents, making their life so much easier. And he ended up putting himself through school. Yeah, he got a job. He put himself through school, and he learned to fly those things. He learned to fly those big jets over time. And his parents were so proud of him. His mom and dad he made good money. He made something for himself. And he remembers some of the boys that were in town, they heard what he did with his life, and they remember the discussion he had before he left. You sure you want to do that? But you know what? He took the chance. He knew there was more out there, and he didn't have all the answers in the process, but he took the chance. And it paid off. There was a little bit of envy in from his old friends from the old village. But he pressed on, took some chances. So I tell you that story, and that was a happily ever after story. I tell you that story because we all have these times in our life. If I gave you 5 minutes to sit down, you could probably write several times you came to what we would call a crossroad or a threshold in your life, and you said, do I do this or don't I? Or what could happen or how? But he knew what he wanted, and we pushed on, and he pushed on, and we pushed on. And sometimes we didn't push on. And sometimes when we get older, we look back and say, boy, if I would have done this when I was younger, or if I would have done that when I was younger. We all have those thresholds that we cross. And some of them are very distant. Some of them you never knew were there unless you did what this young man did, and you pushed on and pushed on. Yeah, I know of several times in my life I wish I would have did things different. I know of several things in my life that I'm happy I did what I did. So, I grew up in a family of seven brothers and sisters, and I am the second oldest. And when my dad was younger, he had us kids, my mom and him had us started having a family when they were very young. And my dad wasn't overly wealthy when I was a kid. But you know what? He was very efficient, and I saw that as I got older. He was very conservative in the way he lived, and he grew up on a farm, uh, and he was the oldest boy of 6 children. 5 of them were boys. He was the oldest, and he didn't like the farm. He told me that with his own mouth. I didn't really care for the farm. So when he was 18, he moved out. He said that's enough. He said I'm going to go get a different life for myself. He didn't move far from the farm, and we always stayed really close with his parents. But needless to say, me and my 7 brothers and sisters never were born or raised on a farm. I eventually started working on my grandpa's farm and then my uncle's farm when I was of age, but which I'll get into in a little bit. But he moved close to the farm, and we still had a country home. And again, he wasn't overly wealthy, so what we did, he was efficient. I'd like to share some things in my life as far as I know these. If I didn't cross these thresholds or these crossroads, I would not be the person I am today. And we had chores, us kids, when we were growing up. Even though we didn't have a farm, my dad lived in the country, big gardener, uh, big gardener. We probably had the biggest garden in the neighborhood, and my dad was good at it. I can say that now. He was really good at gardening. He planted. We remember tilling the ground, us kids, and planting and holding the stick with the little rope on it so he could hoe a straight line. That garden looked nice. And in fact, I remember people driving by sometimes. They would drive by real slow, and they'd look at that garden and go, wow. And we knew they were admiring our dad's garden. And, my dad, he could notice that, like, I'm checking out the garden. So what some of those people saw as beautiful, me and my brothers and sisters saw as work. We saw it as toil in the sun, which I'll get into. But we all had our chores growing up, and we thought we were. Oh my goodness, we thought we lived. He was Pharaoh, and we lived in Goshen, and oh my gosh, and some of the chores we did were the gardening. I remember. Uh, the planting, the weeding in the early spring. We all had our rows to weed, and some of the things me and my older brothers and sisters will laugh at now. Oh, we hated back then. Do we get together and have a great time sharing with one another how we thought we thought we were in labor camps, and it's so awesome to be able to live a life and have these crossroads that you have to go from one to the next to be able to understand, things that we wouldn't have normally understood. Like I said, we all had our rows. I remember one year my dad planted a row of 16 rows of potatoes. I'll never forget it. I could have been 10, 11 years old. Boy, oh boy, even I looked at them potatoes. It was a great year, and it was wonderful. Them came up amazing. We again didn't like it, but I remember we'd play kick the cans as kids, and we would hide in the garden in the big potato patch that year. But Potato Day came, and we talk about it to this day. 40 years later, Potato Day. Remember Potato Day or Carrot Day? Potato Day. And my dad would dig the potatoes out of the ground, and one of us would grab them, put them in an ice cream pail, and another one would haul them up to the house in the wheelbarrow or a little red wagon and little red radio wagons, flyers. And one person was spraying them off, and another one, some of the younger ones, were putting them in the shed to dry. And I remember that year we ended up getting 9 gunny sacks of potatoes. 9 gunny sacks. And we looked at that and we thought, we're going to have blisters on our hands tomorrow. And it was, we thought it was the end of the world. And, it was, nowadays when I look back at it, it was the best days of my life. And I didn't realize it at the time because I had so many more crossroads and thresholds to cross to be able to come to that point. Or we had like Carrot Day. Carrot Day was, oh my goodness, I remember. Carrots, the same situation. You dig the carrots, haul them, wash them, and except we'd sit in the house because you froze the carrots. And one would be peeling, and 2 of us would be, I remember my sister and I looking across the table at each other with them little Perry knives, dice them and slicing them. And this wasn't pails of potatoes or bags or carrots. This was wheelbarrows after wheelbarrows after wheelbarrows of carrots. And we were sitting there looking at each other like, this isn't a home, this is a labor camp, you know. And boy, oh boy, we get good laughs on that now. But I remember the UPS guy pulls in, and the UPS guy says, "Hey," to my mom, "you got your delivery." And it was a food processor. Back in the 80s, early 80s, it was a food processor, and it had a dicer on it, which we didn't realize that till she set it up. And my mom took one of them peeled carrots, and it took a second or two, and boom, we saw them dices fly, and my sisters and I looked at each other, and we said, we have been redeemed from this. And you know, it was still 80% of the job to do, but even 20%, no, we don't have to dice no more. We thought, we've been redeemed from this terrible, terrible toil. And my mom, I remember, she picks up that thing and she looked at it, and there was no adjustable speeds on it. It was one size does all. And she wasn't overly satisfied with how thick them carrots were. And she goes, "You know, I don't want my carrots this thin." She said, "Return it. You return the food processor. Kids, back to your workstations." And oh, my sister and I go, oh, we're standing there cutting that stuff with the breadboard and a little Perry knives for a couple days probably, packing them up in quart bags. But gardening was one of our chores. It was a chore that something we'll talk about even, I'm sure, in our future here. And another one was, and I'm sharing these with you to get to a point, you know. Another one was dishes. Oh my gosh, the dishes. See, as my dad was a gardener, there was none of this paper plate, TV dinner. I'll bet you, just off the cuff, I would bet you, because my dad got his meat from his dad, which was on the farm. He got his milk for nothing when my grandpa owned the farm, and his vegetables we all grew in fruits. So I would venture to say there was probably 80% plus what was on our kids' plates when we were young was 80% almost free. And you don't realize that till you get older and you say, wow, that was really, really a fascinating way my dad did things. But you don't realize it till you get older. I mean, nowadays with this and that. But yeah, the dishes. Oh, so we had our scraping, our sweeping the dining room, scraping the plates, washing the dishes, drying them and putting them away. And like I said, there was none of this paper plate stuff or forks and throwaway stuff. There was none of that. And we would stand there and dry dishes the same way we'd work in the gardens, thinking that this isn't even living. And it was a everyday thing, you know, with 7 brothers and sisters and our parents. There was a bunch of us. So needless to say, there was a good load of dishes every night. And I remember one day the neighbor kids came over, 3 neighbor boys, and they were good neighbors. If it wasn't for them, we may have not seen the outside world until 12, 13 years old. No, it wasn't that bad. We had a great growing up. But they were a little bit less primitive than we were, as there was only 3 of them. But they were good neighbors. They always shared their things with us that we didn't really have a lot of. And so we got to see the best of both worlds. One time I remember they invited us over to their home, and they asked if my sister and I, if we wanted a popsicle. Popsicle? You mean before lunch? Do we dare? You know? And okay, you know, 2 kids, yeah, I'll have a popsicle. And they come out there, and you know, you get them popsicles with the 2 sticks, and you crack them, and everybody gets one. Well, they hand us one of them each, and then they each have one themselves, and they open them up, but they didn't break them. Oh, I remember looking at my 2 older sisters like that, and we looked at each other like, you mean you don't break these? You don't have to share? And they're just eating it like with 2 sticks on it. And I thought, do we say anything? And my sister's like, just eat. And it was it was they shared everything. They had a big swimming pool. We got to go over there and swim, and they were good neighbors. But anyway, one night we were doing dishes. I'll get off on that. We were doing dishes, and my mom says, if they come over and want to play kick the can or hide and go seek or do something outside. And my mom said, well, when dishes are done. So I says, well, can they come and help us? Well, sure, they can come and help you if you want. Hey, if you guys come and help us, we can go outside and play. Oh, we'll come and help you. Really, huh? Volunteering for dishes. So they come in and they're doing dishes, and we noticed they were didn't bother them. And I think, thank you for helping us with dishes. Did you do yours tonight? Well, we don't do dishes, they said. What do you mean you don't do dishes? We have a dishwasher. I said, excuse me? Yeah, well, we have a machine that washes our dishes. Now, I mean, this had to be the early 80s, maybe. And again, we grew up out in the country, and I'm thinking, a dishwasher? What is there? What is there? Two hands that come out and wash it and dry it, and then get tucked in, two more hands come out and work on it and stack it? Or what is this machine they have? I was fascinated. I says, Mom, Dad, why don't we have one of these? There's a machine that the neighbor kids have. They don't have to do dishes. It washes them and dries them automatically. And I remember my mom saying, why would I do that? I have 7 of them right now. And we laugh at it now. We thought, oh, but it was the things that made it what they were that made it so special. The times that we had together, the dishes and such like that. But so that was the dishes. And then there was one more I'd like to go over with you, hauling wood. Boy, did we haul wood. And my dad would get big truckloads of wood. He had a wood burner down in the basement. And he'd get a big truckload of wood and saw it and chop it. And we all had our things hauling it. And we'd fill our shed up with it. And, we would complain because you'd have to, every once a week, you'd have to go down and go in the shed and grab the stack of wood and haul it. We'd all have 2 little things or 3 things. And we'd be walking down the steps, leaning against the wall, just thinking, this is a terrible life of anguish. And we never had it so good. As I'm recording this, I'm 50 years old, and I've never had such a wonderful time in my life. But it took many crossroads and many thresholds, which I'll go with you right now, and to be able to realize and to understand these things in our lives. So they're hauling wood, and I remember. But I do remember, with the wood burning, to this day, if I'm out in the country or even in town and I drive by and it's Christmas time and you get a smell of somebody burning that wood, that'll bring me right back. It'll bring me right back to me and my brothers and sisters hauling from the shed to the basement, to the shed to the basement. I remember one time we had Christmas and Santa Claus came and we woke up and there's this nice big toboggan under the tree, and it was, I think it was 6 feet plus tall. Look at this! We can go sleighing across the road. There was these hills across the road. This is going to be great. Oh, we got such an awesome sled. And my dad says, "Well, that's for hauling wood." um, Actually, he did never say that. I said that to make you laugh because I've heard somebody say that before, so I stole it from him. So that was for a good laugh. But that is what it was like. They'd joke with us, but it wasn't mean. It was something they knew that when we would get older, that we would appreciate, which is exactly what happened. So we had our chores, and uh, we had our times, and then I ended up getting older, and it was 14, 15 years old, going into high school. And my grandpa and my uncle would call me and say, Machu. They would call me Machu. Got to work land tonight. Work land? Work land? What do you mean, drive the tractor and till the ground? Yes, would you like to? And that's one thing my dad would always, when we were on the farm, he left us alone because he knew something we didn't know. We thought we were going to leave slave labor and enter into utopia. And I thought, you betcha I'll do that. And then, oh boy, and for a while it was great. I mean, we got out of that. How I did. I was the oldest again, second oldest of boy, which is and I had 4 sisters or 3 sisters, all up. It was my sister Sarah, me, and my 2 other sisters before my next brother came along. And so I was kind of the only boy in those days that was old enough to work and on the farm and such. So I ended up going there, and I thought, oh, them poor sisters of mine, leaving them like this. I'm sorry, but I was going to go have utopia at the farm. This is one of them thresholds that I'm talking about. I learned, and you wouldn't realize how good you had it unless you saw something a little bit deeper, a little bit more aggressive, to say the least. So. And then you'd have your working land days, and then you'd have your haying days, and it was a mid 80s, and my grandpa, I wasn't old enough. My grandpa had a baler an international baler, I believe, and in them days you had the baler that would come back, and you'd have a guy on the wagon, he'd stack them up. I mean, that was work. But I wasn't old enough to run the wagon, and then they would bring the wagon into the farmyard and unload it and go up in the mow. And I remember the first few times I baled hay, I was up in the haymow. The younger ones, they didn't want them working the wagon, so I was up in the haymow, and I remember thinking, "This is great. Finally, I have some freedom." Well, my grandpa pulls up that load of hay with that brown old Chevy truck he had, put that on that elevator, and I think he was the one up there unloading the wagon to go up in the mow, and it'd go up the elevator, and me and a couple of my uncles and uh, my cousin were up there, and I remember them bales coming, and they come, and you grab that, and I was just a youngster. I was pulling that bale, and my uncles always and my grandpa always made the farm fun. It was the hardest work I ever did in my life, hands down, but it was the best days of my life. It was good hard work. I know what the Bible means when it says in the Proverbs, I believe, or the Ecclesiastes, when it talks about a good day's work. Get a good sweat in there and work hard. There was this feeling that you would have at the end of the day that couldn't be explained other than in the scriptures. And by the way, the scriptures are very much part of this story. You see, I'm sharing these things with you because I believe church and oftentimes and things of God are so boring to people because they're taking the Bible and opening it and reading it, which anybody can do at home by their bedside. Is that a bad thing? No. But if you don't take what God has for us and put it into practical application and bring it into your life and apply these words to your life, it's going to be boring. It is meant to be applied in our lives. That's why I'm sharing a story with you right now. I'm going to take this story and this point, and I'm going to rest it upon God's word. And when you do that, God's word will sprout and it'll come to life. But for me to stand here and read words and not say what that has to do with you or me in the current world we live in, wouldn't you expect that to be boring? Let's take these words in the Bible and put them and plug them into every essence, into our marriage, into our finances, into our childhood, into our current state, into what we want in the future, everything. And if someone says you're taking it too far, you're not. I'm here to tell you you're not. You don't take your creator too far, because what second would you live here on this planet, in this earth, if you weren't created? So every second and everything you or I are doing is always tangled and has something to do with God in the Bible. So that's why I share some of these things like that. But working back on the farm, one bale went in front of another, and I remember saying to myself, I can't do this. This isn't even. This is beyond human. I can't do this. I can hardly move these bales. And then you'd stack it in there, and your uncles, they were real good that way. They knew your situation because they obviously had that when they were younger. So they joke, "Come on, what's wrong, macho? You want to go home now and weed the garden?" Uh, I mean, they knew what was going through our heads, and I just thought to myself, this is madness. My sisters would never believe this, and I couldn't move them bales, and I couldn't move them very easily. I moved them. Probably if there's 125 bales on one of them loads, I might have moved 20 of them out of the 3 or 4 guys in the mow, but in the hay mow. But I got through it, and I thought to myself, when that elevator stopped, I thought, my goodness, I have never worked that hard in my entire life. And I'll never forget it, because I said, "Oh, my uncles," took my hay hooks and I set them down, and I stood up on that elevator. I was going to walk down it. Oh, actually, no, I walked down the ladder back then that went from the manger in the barn up to the hay mow. And they go, "Where are you going?" I says, "What do you mean, where are we going? We're done." And my uncle taps me on the shoulder, and he looks out the barn window, and here comes my grandpa with another load. And I thought, "You mean we have to do 2 of these today?" And my uncle says to me, "2 of them? It's 11 o'clock in the morning. We don't stop until the dew settles, because then the hay gets heavy." And I thought, "Excuse me?" And I stood up in that hay mow all day long, one bale after another, after another. And I thought to myself, I couldn't process this. The only thing I understood is why my father didn't care to farm. And that to me really started making sense. And I started getting a whole new perspective on how much toil us kids had to do with our chores at home. I just entered a threshold I didn't even realize was there. But you know what? That threshold was a positive crossing. I didn't even know it was there, and I would have never known it was there if I was not pushed to a point. And I remember that because after the days and weeks went by of this hard baling hay, I felt myself getting stronger. 14, 15 years old, I felt myself getting more built. I started feeling really good. And when I say good, I'm not lying. I felt cleansed. You know, where you were starting high school, you want to go out at night. And boy, you work a good day on the wagon or a good day haying. And if there's anything that's going to enhance how you feel, it is going to be a day like that. And I learned those things. But I wouldn't have learned them if I didn't cross that line, if I didn't cross that threshold. And I just thank God. I can see God working throughout my life in those things. And as I got older, I got to work the wagon. I got to work, and I got to be a junior and a senior in high school. And I just remember saying to myself, you know, even in the fall of the year, it was always that first crop. That first crop, normally we had three crops. That first crop of hay was the one that got you out of the slumberous school year you just had for 9 months. And it get about mid-July, you got a few weeks off, but there was always things to do on the farm. And I was very fortunate, though, and that's probably why I enjoyed the farm, because even some of my cousins crossed thresholds I didn't cross, such as their dad did live on the farm and work on the farm. They had to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I was very fortunate, but watching them, you know, and crossing these crossroads and thresholds, you realize there's a lot of thresholds out there that you can cross. There's a big world out there. And if you're just going to sit back and you're not going to push yourself to find something out there, you're never going to know. You're just going to stagnate your life. Your years will go by, and there'll be so many things that God has for you. But if you don't cross those thresholds and push yourself, you'll never find them. And I was privileged by God Himself to be able to experience the things I did. And then the second crop was, you know, that was the crop where you could really feel yourself conditioning. I mean, it was nothing for me to lose 30, 35 pounds in 3 months. I remember going back as a senior and people would look at me, Brett Knocker, is that you? I mean, I looked like a different race almost. I was in the sun so long, and I was 30 pounds lighter. And boy, did I feel good. I felt good for myself. I remember sitting there in the September of the year, and that's when we started, you know, after school and helping with the corn and looking at that hay mow. And even back then, I remember standing there as 18, 19 years old looking. My grandpa had a big wood barn and attached a tin barn later on. And I remember looking at that big old wood barn, and it was a big barn. I thought, I can't believe one bale after another, after another. You'd think it would take forever to do what you're looking at. That barn was full right to the peak. And then you had the tin barn we went in later on in the summer, which is the third crop. That was like an oven. Now, the wood barn was nice because the wind would blow through, but the tin barn, you know, that was different. That was if it was 95 degrees outside, it was 110 in there. If you know, sometimes the hay dust would get so much you couldn't even see 20 feet away. But it was all good. It was all good. If I didn't experience those things, I would have nothing for you today. But that farm, and I see now, when my dad told us, you haul a little wood, you know, pick a few weeds, you know, do some dishes. You know, we thought it was, and you know what? I'll tell you what. When I did that for as number of years that I did that, and I remember, I mean, I spent the summers at the farm, and them first couple summers, I remember going back, and I remember listening to my sisters and stuff like that talking about their chores and things like that, and I had that little fifth or sixth sense, that what you call it, that little sixth sense that said, don't even try to share your viewpoint about this. They weren't lazy. My sisters had their share of work too, but to share what I just did this entire summer, I mean, I was gone a long time. I remember sometimes I was gone so long, I come back home and say, well, my dad's garden is mature. Uh, the last time I saw this, the plants were this high. I was gone a long time. But to see my sisters and have them chores and watch it and watch us again doing our chores, I had a whole different outlook on them chores. And to this day, when something needs to be done, it brings me back to them baling one bale after another bale, one this after another that, and it says you get down and you get dirty, because if you don't get down, don't worry about whatever. If you don't push yourself, if you don't bring yourself to a place, you'll never know it's there. And when we're believers, and we're believers in God, and we stand here and we say, well, I went to Bible studies. Now I'm guilty. I'm sharing something that I am guilty, just as much as all, if not more. But we stand here as believers and we read our Bible for an hour a day. And we go to church every Sunday. And I'll tell you something. There are thresholds out there with God that are so far off in a distance, we'll never see them if we don't push ourselves. And you'll see, I read stories about people and I say, well, I want this. I want this. Well, you can have that. I can lose 30 pounds a summer. You can have that. But do you know what that's going to, you know what's asked of you? You know what's going to have to be done? And all of those little stupid things that, not stupid, but those memories I'm sharing with you about my life that appear to have nothing to do with God have everything to do with God. Because I'm here to tell you today, there are thresholds in each and every one of our lives concerning the things of God and the kingdom of God that we will never cross if we don't put ourselves in that mountain range like that boy, like that young man, where he sat there by himself in the middle of the night after 2 weeks and there was nothing but silence. And the only thing that pushed him on is he knew what he wanted and he went and got it. And it was a scary times. And if I wasn't pushed in my life as a kid and then stepping up to another thing that I thought I was the hardest worker in the world, and I realized this was not even almost categorized as work, some of the chores we did as kids, compared to what I was about to face moving on to the farm. And then I could go on and on with this. I could share with you how when it's time to go out into the world. And what do you want, Matt? What do you want? You want to have a family and a wife one day? You want to have a house? And I remember that it says, you know now, there's thresholds. There's this is possible, but you want to cross these thresholds and you want to come to them, then you're going to have to cross a few points that are going to take a little bit of discomfort to get there. So I remember my first wife. I'll close with this little story. I remember my first wife. She passed away, but she was very close to God. And when I say close to God, I don't mean your everyday average seventh or eighth grader. I didn't date her then. I mean, she shared stories with me, but her parents were Christians and they were very close to God. And she went a little bit farther than the rest of them. I mean, uh, and I heard these stories from her mother and from some of her family, and she would write things in the notebooks that God would give her, these visions and such. I mean, this was not just your ordinary, everyday, average Christian. I remember stories being told about her that she would fast a seventh grader, an eighth grader. These are the peer pressure years. And she was fasting for 7 days and reading the Bible and getting close to God. And she was getting words from God. She was getting visions from God at that age. And, when I met her, she was quite a bit older, but I heard stories. I actually saw some of the notebooks and read some of the things that she had written down. She wasn't in it for the show because she didn't like it when people would show her that, or when people would show me that, or people would talk about it. But I remember before she got sick. I remember before she got sick, or actually during when she was sick. And she knew she didn't stay that close with God. It isn't like she went off like the prodigal, I don't think. But she remembers when she at the end of her life, she left us at 39 years old. But at the end of her life, we were talking one night, and I'll never forget it because she says, she's been across some distant thresholds in her life with God, even in her youth. And when she pulled back from a lot of that stuff, I don't know, what God required of her or for what reason, completely, but I do know that we were talking one night, and she said, I says, well, we're Christians. I mean, we're this and that. And she kind of snickered, and she goes, what? I says, what? I says, hey, we go to church. We read our Bible here and there and stuff like that. And she kind of laughed, but she didn't do it in a smart way. She did it in a very serious way. She goes, that's a joke what you're talking about. Because she was at places with God that so many of us may never see. I know that to be true. And maybe I don't know. Maybe that has something to do why she got to leave early. If you call that a positive or not a positive, I'm not going to get into that tonight. But she was a very close with God. I always look at her as the Samson. Uh, Samson. I always look at my first wife as the Samson because she came back, and at the end, God gave her them visions again and gave her them. But the point of today's topic is these thresholds. So, if you want to be somewhere with God and you really want to go somewhere, don't follow other people so much. There are thresholds out there that are out of your sight and out of my sight, but they're out there. And if you really want it, and you really, really want it, you go get it. Just remember, it's not an easy road, but it's very rewarding. And I don't care where a person is with God. There's always another threshold out there somewhere. So if you think, why don't God talk to me? Why don't I see angels? Why don't these things happen? Well, in my personal opinion, it is because you haven't even come close to the thresholds that you need to cross to have those types of credentials to have God be able to work with you. But I'm here to tell you today, you watching, oh, they're all there. And you take that to the bank. You can go wherever you want with God. You just got to get to the threshold. So listen, I want to thank everybody for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And until next time, God bless.